Okay, maybe I won't. It says I don't have permission to go live stream. All right, I'll figure that out another time. All right, so start with a word of prayer, and then I'll introduce Dr. Hillis. So Father, I thank you for another opportunity to gather in your name to discuss your people and how we ought to live according to your word, according to your example in the world. As you bless our time together, and may we glorify God with everything that we say and do. Pray in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right,
Amen.
so welcome everybody. Glad you're here. And we're here talking with Dr. Tim Hillis, who is his educational background is in ministry, Hebrew studies. I'll let him fill in the details there because I'm not familiar with them. He has some experience in missions, both with Native American people here in the States and in China. He has some experience with helping small congregations get started in developing leadership. And he's going to share with us some of his experiences in China and what it's like for a believer living under a hostile government, how to maintain your faith, and not just maintain your faith, but how do you become stronger because of the trials that you experience. So Tim, what else would you like to tell us? Feel free to share your website, your ministry, tell us kind of, what projects you've got going on, what your background is, how you ended up in China.
Well, thank you, first of all, for such a gracious introduction and for having me to begin with. And please always refer to me as Tim. I don't wear a title or a badge. I'm just Tim. And
Okay.
The thing that's incredibly interesting. Well, let me go back. Let's start with the education, because you brought that up, and to make this more chronological, that probably makes more sense. I accepted Messiah very young age. I grew up in a Midwestern Pentecostal / evangelical home, middle income. I wasn't from a privileged household, but we also didn't struggle, from paycheck to paycheck, though we may have, and I would have never have known, because mom and dad were good budgeters and didn't share those kinds of things with us. And one of my brothers, my oldest brother, I'm the youngest of 5. I have 2 surviving brothers and 1 surviving sister. My other sister, who was the closest sibling to me, passed away of cancer about 7 years ago. But I was inspired because we attended an inner city Assembly of God church until I was age 5, and then my parents had some marital troubles and fell away from Abba, backslid, whatever terminology works best for each of you. And that marital trauma, that marital trouble, bled over into all of the relationships inside the household. But my eldest brother had always felt a call on his life, even when he was sowing his wild oats, as they say. And he did eventually fully commit himself to Messiah. Of course, in his mind, committed himself to Christ. He wouldn't use the terminology Messiah, though now he might, because he and I have had a lot more interaction. And he spent a career in the military as a chaplain, and that inspired me growing up. I accepted Messiah when I was 11, became serious about it when I was 12 years of age, and by the time I was 13, had entered into a mentorship for ministry because I felt a call on my life. I felt God speaking to me, if you will. And please forgive the generic use of the title God or the label God. If that's offensive, I apologize to anyone to whom that may be, because I know that
Don't think it will be in this group.
Okay, great. So from there, I had a pastor who was only educated to the 5th grade when he had to drop out to help take care of his family. He grew up in Tennessee, very rural Tennessee, and he had to drop out of school in the 5th grade because he was the eldest son and needed to help provide for the family. And yet he was the most in tuned Christian pastor I've ever known. When I would ask him questions, he understood that, especially when we're talking about Tanakh, he understood that while his denomination, which at that time was the Pentecostal Church of God, while his denomination did not uphold a pronomian view, and he would have never have even known that word, he understood that there were definite quotes and direct applications to what they call the Old Testament, and I guess most folks still do, and in the writings of the apostles or the New Testament. And so when I asked questions, he guided me along that line and never made that clear distinction that we are in the new covenant and that means the old covenant is done away with. Instead, he talked about the relationship between them and how one was a foreshadowing and so forth. And while that sounds really stereotypical, the wisdom in it was that it never closed the door in my heart or in my mind, in my soul, in my spirit, if you will. And I think that arguably it would happen in our soul and not in our spirit, but it never closed the door to the fact that this is all scripture from cover to cover, and it has equal authority between Malachi and Matthew. And one doesn't lose its authority in our life simply because we have moved into a season where the application is different. And so when I went on in my life and eventually became a pastor for the Church of God out of Cleveland, Tennessee, I had attended Lee University through extension courses for my licensure. I was pastoring in Colorado Springs. I was working at Focus on the Family. And I had a coworker who was a Gentile Messianic Jew, or that's how he referred to himself. And at that time, that would have been 1994, 95, it was still typical for them to convert to Messianic Judaism rather than simply slather the name Yeshua and some Hebrew words all over predominantly antinomian Christian beliefs, which is what has become really popular now, and call ourselves pronomian. Because now we say Yeshua instead of Jesus. We say, Yahweh or Yehovah or Abba or Yah instead of, God, and so forth. Well, that intrigued me and it pricked my heart. So he loaned me a copy of Dr. Stern's book, The Messianic Manifesto. And while I recognized a very distinct finger of modern Judaism inside that manifesto, I also recognized the distinct truth that was connected to the information he was sharing. Jump ahead several years, and Abba led me to complete my PhD through a conservative. The door just opened. I'll put it that way. I knew that I needed to pursue further education because I knew that one day we would be planting a Messianic / HRM / pronomian / whole Bible focused but Messiah centered Bible college. And I needed, in order for accreditation to be possible, there has to be a PhD at the helm and a PhD on teaching as a professor. At least in as far as I know, in every one of the 48 states. So I pursued that, and as doors opened, and I eventually earned my PhD through a conservative word of faith. I know, taboo, right? But it was a very conservative word of faith Bible college that allowed me to write all of my papers from a Hebraic context, and graded them based on my solid hermeneutic, my ability to prove my thesis, and to include, because I was careful to include the antithesis from the antinomian Christian side to compare and contrast in all of my papers, and they couldn't knock me for any of the theological conclusions I came to, because my hermeneutics met the grade. And Abba really blessed me in that, because I walked away being able to influence multiple worlds, I guess, in a way, because I now have a stronger grasp of the Pentecostal charismatic evangelical perspective, having been through 3 or 4 different universities before I finished my PhD. And at the same time, while I can speak the lingo, I know I learned, I don't know, I'm not perfect at it, but I learned the right verbiage to be able to build a bridge, so that I'm not burning bridges. And hopefully I can use those bridges to bring some antinomians into a whole Bible perspective, and to meet the God of the Bible the way the God of the Bible introduced himself. And through that, 20 something years ago, when the vision was first birthed, we were known as Harvest of Hope International. And then a half a dozen other Harvest of Hope International sprung up over the years, and people began getting confused about which is you, which is them. And it wasn't really because of that we changed, but that was certainly an incentive. In November of 2018, I really began to feel a shift that we needed to rebrand, change, and begin creating a larger gap, if you will, between the antinomians we were attempting to reach and the pronomian theology that we wanted to promote. And by that, I don't mean that we were building a chasm between them, but that it was becoming far more distinct and clear that we are pronomian, we are whole Bible, we are messianic HRM, slash HRM slash whole Bible, whatever label needs to be put on it to folks to fully grasp. Because we do agree with messianism in a lot of ways. We don't necessarily agree with the Judaic side all that much, or the Judaism. We agree with the Hebraic, but not the Judaic, if that is easy enough to make that distinction.
Yep.
And we do grab hold of some of the things that HRM holds dear and true, but we also separate from some of the things that they hold dear and true. And the same with Christianity. There is some truth there, but our job, we feel, is to extract that truth from the deception and the Greco-Roman hermeneutic that it's founded in, and help people to recognize why it's true from a Hebraic perspective, whole Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, without necessarily having to pull in the extra biblical books, but on occasion that's necessary to establish history and precedents, etc., within the Hebraic culture. And it all grew from that. So Remnant Nation, Harvest of Hope International became Remnant Nation, quite literally, from November 1 to December 15 in 2018. By January 1 of 2019, we relaunched the website, had the redesign done in the background, and just clicked a switch, literally at midnight Chinese time, China time, Beijing time. We flipped a switch and we were Remnant Nation. And Remnant Nation focuses more on the Hebraic, bringing the antinomian into a whole Bible understanding of not only Abba, but of Yeshua. And we are not Trinitarian from the modern biblical or the modern Christian perspective. We are probably closer to an Essenic understanding of the Trinity as a series of revealing, not a separate necessarily personhood. And that's kind of I'll leave that at that, because that gets touchy and it takes a lot of time to explain. So going forward, we ended up in Beijing because a former World Harvest Bible College peer, because that is one of the colleges I attended, was doing ministry in China. I knew that he had some messianic background, and he was calling for people to come to China to help with the work of the ministry. That was his verbiage. And I felt a prick in my heart. So Natalie and I were not yet married, but we had set a date and we were praying about it, when do we go? And about a month, we were married on December 15th, and on, if I remember correctly, January 5th, we landed in Beijing. So that is what took us to Beijing. When we arrived, we discovered that my friend, who I'll keep nameless unless I slip, we'll call him Joe. He was not pursuing a messianic perspective or a whole Bible perspective. He had inherited a very Christian, very Pentecostal church from a Korean evangelist who had moved on. They came, they planted this organization, they liked Joe. Joe had a very charismatic personality, and so they turned it over to him when they moved on. And Joe had done quite a job of setting up a secret congregation right under the nose of the authorities in the same province, if you will, or area known as Wangjing. And Wangjing was also known as Koreatown. So it made sense. But he had set up a deal with a Chinese movie theater owner who didn't open until 1 p.m. on Sundays, because he was a closet Christian and attended Christian church. So Joe was renting a theater from them and holding services that could seat about 500 people. It was a pretty large theater. And I went the first week I spoke, or the first week I was there, I spoke, and I spoke on how things happen very quickly when the glory of God, trying not to use that in the same way that the catchphrase glory is used among charismatics so much now. But when the glory of God descends on something, things accelerate. Things begin to happen much more quickly. And Joe kind of didn't really take that all that seriously. The next week, the theater had been booked. So he just went into an open cafe in the middle of a mall, and we were raided by the Central Police. And I was on the radar of the Central Police. That would be the same as our FBI. Within 10 days of having landed in Beijing. And the point being that could have been avoided because it didn't have to happen. But I believe Abba did put us through that in order to start us off on the right foot in learning how to do ministry under an oppressive government. And I think I'll pause there and we can move forward with any questions or discussion you'd like to carry this, Jay.
Okay. Well, I do have, I watched a couple of documentaries on Christianity in China, and, they have the state churches, big, especially associated with the Catholic Church, but there are others. And, they look very mainstream. They look just like a Christian church in America or Europe. What is the real difference between the state-sanctioned churches and the home churches? I mean, other than size and venue.
Sure. No, that's a great question. We did occasionally attend a church allowed, multi-denominational, non-denominational church for non-Chinese. That's the separation. Non-Chinese, now they could be Chinese if they were not a Chinese native. So I need to make a clear distinction. There were a lot of Australian Chinese who were not natives of China who attended that church, but native Chinese could not. They could offer a service to native Chinese, but no one else was allowed to be there in any way participating in any ministry of any sort. So you could attend, but you better just sit down, keep your hands crossed, don't raise, don't worship, don't even pray out loud. Because if you do, the plants from the government, and they're always there, would definitely escort you out. You'd be blackballed and escorted out of the country. Now, on the other side of that, the state-sanctioned church, that's the 3 Self church. And the sad part is they get that three self from American missiology. And I had to Google it to remember what three self stands for, because it's been a little while. Three self basically stands for self-supporting, let's see here, self-governance, and by supporting that means financial, no dependence upon any foreign aid whatsoever. Self-governance, self-supporting, and self-propagating. We even in the circles my wife and I ran with inside YWAM, Youth with a Mission, inside the Native American ministry that we did before and after Beijing, we used what is known as contextual missions. And contextual missions just simply means learn the culture, learn the language, and then look for the places where it's obvious that Abba was revealing himself to the people, the indigenous people groups within their own culture, and then bring scriptural parallels into that to help them to understand how scripture does explain how God was inserting himself into their culture and revealing himself to them, just as scripture promises he does. That typically prevents a lot of the walls that get built up, as long as you can do it in a way that doesn't cross those cultural barriers that have hot buttons from, say, like the Native Americans have a lot of hot buttons from when the Jesuits moved west and basically followed an Islamic culture of convert or be beaten until you do. And I say that tongue in cheek. I'm trying to be careful. I'm trying to be friendly, but at the same time, and not be overly graphic. But that's kind of the approach that was utilized, and that's been used a lot in a lot of in most countries. Well, that three self philosophy is what the Chinese church has adopted out of U.S. missiology or Western missiology, and in doing that, they have effectively put up a wall of their own. And I know for a fact the head of YWAM sat down with either Jin Ping or his highest representative, who was a closet Christian at the time, being secretly mentored by a Chinese Christian hiding in Indonesia, and sneaking in and out of mainland China in order to mentor several high-ranking politicians or political figures within the Chinese government. And when Lauren Cunningham sat down with this representative, or Jin Ping, I just don't recall which it was, they said, we have no problem with the Jesus of the Bible. We have a problem with the Jesus of the West. And what they were really saying is the Jesus of the Bible is almost communist, and we can make him communist without changing his words, by redefining what he says, building a complete redefinition of the verbiage, and we can make him communist, so that everywhere someone from one of our three self churches goes to visit and hears a Christian message on this Western Jesus, they're going to hear a communist Jesus, whether that's the intent from the pulpit or not.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And so, the whole other Jesus philosophy that has been adopted, the other Messiah that has been adopted by Western Christianity, that those of us of a whole Bible perspective have exodus from, is precisely the Jesus that China wants to promote, but from a communist perspective. Right before we left, there's a website known as Taobao in China, and it's basically their version of Amazon on steroids. You can get stuff, well, more like Amazon has become in the big cities now, because they have these little electric tricycles and these trikes with boxes on them, and I could place an order on Taobao and most of the time get it same day. Not always, but most of the time. And these, we're talking 1/20th of the world's population in half the space of New York City, not New York State, New York City. Beijing is roughly half the size of New York City, but the nation itself is 1/20th of the population. The population of Beijing is more than double that of New York City in the boroughs. And they could still get most of this stuff to me same day. The reason I say that is it's extremely important to understand how their culture operates, because the goal is to make it life very convenient and very simple, so that why would I want to live anywhere else? I have all the conveniences. The government provides me with a job if I can't find one. If I can't afford to be in business for myself, I can find investors, but those investors, of course, eventually really own the business, but nobody knows that up front. And the philosophy in that nation is a job for everyone and everyone for a job. And so they provide very shoddy materials, and this is the whole reason Trump, in my opinion, made the demands on China either raise the quality of your products or we're not importing them into the US anymore. And that's what started the whole trade war that we saw, that was part of the reason we felt it was time for us to make our exit while the getting was good. I'll come to that a little later, but the process there is very much around convenience and self. That's the bottom line in communism. It's about self, but not self-reliance or self-dependence, but on, as long as I get what I want, then I'm happy. And the government delivers that in every feasible way you can imagine. And the Taobao website had just declared, or the government has just told them, you'll no longer sell any Bibles that are not promoted by the Three Self Church. And by the way, within the next year, there will be a new translation for the Three Self Bible. And I promise you, Jesus was very much a communist in that new version. I haven't been able to get my hands on one.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the people that they interviewed in one of the documentaries I watched was, he was an evangelist, native Chinese evangelist who had started a house church. And, he refused to, let the government run things. He refused to cooperate, and they put a lot of pressure on him, but they let him continue to operate. And one of the things that he told the interviewer, I'm pretty sure that this documentary was done by CBS or one of those mainstream channels.
Okay.
He told them that what he got away with this because he emphasized to officials who came to him that Jesus has a lot in common with communism. They both teach all about loving the other person more than yourself. And it's all about the community and not about the individual. And do you think that that's caused by that? Do you think that's a long-term effect of this, this philosophy of reinterpreting the words of Jesus to be more compatible with communism? Or is that him, just trying to placate them, telling them what they want to hear?
It could very well be both, because we had to play that card more than once. When we were at that open cafe meeting, we were sitting there eating lunch, but there was somebody up front playing a keyboard and singing worship songs when the central police came in from all directions. I mean, they literally flooded off of the elevator nearest the one entrance. They turned off the down escalator and ran up the up escalator, or the down escalator coming from the other side. They came in through the kitchen, which was a back entrance that somehow apparently led into another floor. They literally came from every direction. And when they saw my wife and I was still kind of wearing I'm retired law enforcement. I spent a lot of time in law enforcement from the time I was, even 19, before I was old enough to be a certified officer. I retired in 2011. from a sheriff's office in central Arizona. I was a SWAT squad team leader. I was #2 in charge of the multiple agency academy training officers. These are certainly things they had to have known about me prior to during the vetting process for my visa. And the reason I say that is because I worked for a government school. It was an international school, but it was government regulated, and then later moved to Beijing University and taught at the university. So these are surely things they knew about me. But they sent this really, I don't know how to explain her, but Cupid doll like this almost China figurine looking young lady to talk to my wife and I when they were sending the big brutish tough guys to talk to all of the other groups. And I didn't think about that much at the time, but in retrospect, I think it was because they thought she would somehow disarm us with her friendliness and her politeness, etc. And when she interviewed us, she said, "Well, why are you here?" And I said, "Well, because we were told that there would be a community of other how did we word it? Other believers of our kind, and that lunch was free. So we simply came to be able to fellowship with other Americans who believe the way we do. We didn't know there'd be people other than Americans here. Fortunately, that day there were no Chinese in attendance. The week prior, when I had spoken in the theater, it was probably 50 or 60% Chinese. And I was the first person in that congregation to have a Mandarin translator. And it was really unique because it turns out she was an Australian Chinese who worked with Jackie Chan because she was a television producer, a movie producer, and he had done a number of his movies in Australia to save on costs. And
Mhm.
she happened to be one of his production team. And she also was a translator at Hillsong, which opened a lot of doors for us to get these messages into places that we couldn't have otherwise got them. So I'm sure these are also things that this investigator from the Central Police knew. Nothing goes through the firewall. We call it the Great Firewall. Nothing gets through the Great Firewall that isn't detected and reviewed, period. There's an AI that watches every word, every video. I don't care if you can be as secure as you want with VPNs and everything else. There's an AI that sees and hears it all. And I do think that it's possible. And I'm sorry, it took me a while to get back to this, but I do think it's possible that he was very much giving them the party line without putting too fine a head on it
Mhm.
to placate them. It's also just as possible that he was blending the three self church doctrine into whatever organization he was a part of. And I say that because we had a number of circumstances where we met with people who we thought were Christians, but they had blended Taoism and even Japanese Shintoism and other Asian belief systems. It was very much like being in first century Rome. They didn't discard any religion they got a hold of. They put it into and then defined it according to whatever their predominant belief system was. Does that make
Sort of,
sense?
yeah, sort of their
So
version of
yeah,
a Unitarian Universalist.
yes, yeah. I would say that. I mean, as far as Western culture is concerned, it's
Mhm.
very much similar. The major difference is that it's all going to revolve around that Eastern. Um, I'm careful to. I want to be careful not to use the word Buddhism, but it is a branding of Buddhism, the Taoism, and so forth that they do kind of blend everything and filter it through. But there's also a lot because the generation that you have now are the people who are post-religion. You know, when the communists came in, all religion died. Communism became the religion, but there were some remnants and some holdouts. So what is spreading there now, or at least when we were there, is this composite of Christianity because you get the Jesus of the West, and anything US is cool. Anything from America is cool. It's trendy, it's exciting, it's hip, and it needs to be added to what we're doing. And that's exactly what's basically going on. The Catholic
Okay.
Church, before I forget, you said something a
Mhm.
minute ago, kind of comparing the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church does have some permission to work there. The Catholic Church was being put on a very short leash. I can't recall exactly what it was, but they were being told that they couldn't preach a specific doctrine that is central to their mass. And so a lot of priests were already letting their congregants know that they were going to be breaking the law. And if they attended mass during those times when that regulation was being enforced, they could potentially be imprisoned. So they were cracking down even on Catholicism while we were there.
Okay. Want to just take a minute here. Several new people came in after we got started, and just want to say welcome. Glad you're all here. Some of you, I think, just joined Common Sense Bible Study recently within the last couple of days. If you haven't had a chance to look around the site yet, want to make sure that you know that we've got that we do a weekly Bible study on Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central Time. It's live and it's in the event list, so you can get the Zoom link there. All of our past studies and conversations are in the video index. We record everything and make it available there for all of our members. There are some areas that are kind of premium areas that you can get to. You should see them in the main menu. If you're curious, you can go to the Chiasm course or a Sabbath to Yahweh. If you just click on that, it'll tell you what the options are so that you can get access. But again, I'm glad you're here, and we're going to open up a little bit later for just general comments and questions. One thing I wanted to ask about, for the house churches in China, how does word spread? I mean, how do people find out? How do they know who they can trust, where it's safe to go? I assume that, within families and friends, who it's safe to talk to. But how do those other people know that it's safe to go and meet in this place? Or is that even really a consideration?
It depends on the location. For instance, in Wangjing and surrounding Wangjing, actually, there were a number of apartment buildings that were known to have several house churches in them. And we did a weekly meeting where several of us rotated which week we went. That was more or less an English roundtable. And the idea was that we would go in and give them a short lecture, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sermonette, if you will. And the purpose was so that they could then ask questions in English, receive answers in English, and it went back and forth like this to give them the ability to increase their vocabulary, to improve their pronunciation, to improve syntax, all of the things necessary to compete in the modern business world, because English is the language of the modern global business. And so in order to make them more competitive as a nation, English is vitally important. And that's, as being a good Chinese nationalist, even a Christian Chinese nationalist, they wanted to have English as good as possible so that they could have that competitive edge in whatever field they were in. So there were a lot of professionals, not just what they would consider commoners, lay people or the labor force. But a lot of executives would show up, and most of these took place at Chinese house churches. And we would go to an apartment building and sometimes get off on the wrong floor, and there'd be 4 apartments around the elevator, and they all had a cross hanging on the door. And that was one of the ways that people knew it was a house church. Other times there would just be a flyer posted in Chinese, such and such. The label Baptist was predominantly the most used. And so you would see such and such Baptist church and say in Chinese, some name like, the risen sun, S-O-N, Baptist church in English. So the risen sun in Chinese, Baptist church in English. And I think that was because there probably is no Chinese word for Baptist or church. They could call it a temple or something of that nature. And Chinese probably does, or China probably does have some Christian history. Their first emperor actually established a temple dedicated to prayer. He entered from the south, just like the kings in Jerusalem would enter the Temple Mount from the south. They did sacrifices of clean animals around the equinoxes, which is pretty much like the feasts typically do. They did, or the typical follower of the feast would do. Let me make that more concise or precise. So anyway, long story short, there's a lot of history there, and the early Chinese pictographic language, if you will, tells the story of the flood to the crucifixion several hundred years before the crucifixion happened. So there is a deep-seated history in Bible believing within the culture of China. And I'm trying to be careful without saying it in a way that's not accurate, but those churches would then advertise through the very same things I just said. Did you know that our early language actually tells the history of the flood through the, or the fall, I'm sorry, not the flood, the fall through the crucifixion? And let me lead you along this path. A Singaporean pastor made it absolutely famous by doing a video. You could probably still find it on YouTube. That pastor later fell into some serious trouble. I don't know if he's still in prison or not, but he did an amazing job in detailing this out, and they would witness that way. Most Chinese are very open to this. We never really had a house church per se, because when we felt it was time to walk away from my buddy Joe and do something whole Bible, because what he was doing was very shepherding movement, super exuberant honor upon the pastor. I don't remember him ever opening a door for himself. Someone was always running from the back of the crowd, competing to open a door for him. And that kind of stuff just began to turn my stomach, and I saw it all over China, everywhere I went. And that's what pulled us away from. And we established a separate thing, but we never really did a house church, but we did a lot of work with house churches. The YRAM group that we worked with basically operated as house groups, house churches. We trained their leaders, and then they disseminated it to all of their groups. We did conferences out in the countryside at a mall that was being renovated, but not yet open to the public, inside a gated community. So if the government showed up, we knew about it, because security would call us and tell us, hey, they're here. And we would get in our cars and leave.
That's nice.
Or jump on a bus, or whatever. So word of mouth is what worked best for us. And we just trusted people to only invite trusted people. That was probably a little dangerous in hindsight, but it was the only method we had, because we knew that we didn't have a long time there. We knew we were only going for 3 to 5 years. But the house churches that have been there for a long time, most of them, Jay, they probably, like you said, invited friends and family, etc. But they were the biggest thing that we saw, at least in Beijing, is that if they had an agreement with the local police, by going to the local police and telling them, we're training our people to be good citizens, like the interviewer said, or the interviewee said, we're teaching them to love one another. We're teaching them to show up for work and be faithful, even if you're underpaid. Those are all things that would be appealing to the government and would keep that local police department from getting in trouble with the central police, because they could say, look, we've already been there, we've questioned them, and this is the answers we got. And typically that would satisfy the central police unless there were complaints, because the central police didn't have time to go check out every single house church. This building that I told you we'd get off on the wrong floor occasionally, and there's 4 house churches on one floor. This thing was 29 stories tall. And if even a third of those had more than one house church on any given floor, we're talking over 100 churches in just that one building. And that was only one wing of this 29-story building. It was 4 wings. So, there could have been as many as 400 or 500 house churches just in that one thing if there was only a third of them actually house churches. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It sounds like, I've heard official numbers of Christians in China and how Christianity is growing. But of course, there's always the caveat that the real numbers are so much larger than anything that we know. And it sounds like it's even larger than anybody hints at. Do you think that's in response to persecution? That those numbers are actually growing because of the oppression?
I think originally, yes. Now, I think it is the Western thing to do. As much as I hate to say that, I'm hesitant because I never want to doubt someone's confession or faith in Messiah, even if they are connected to an antinomian belief system. If they believe in Messiah, there's hope. If they put their trust in Messiah, there's hope. So I'm hesitant to make any kind of definitive statement on that, but in my personal assessment, I think it's entirely possible that most, at least, again, we weren't just, we were headquartered in Beijing because we lived just outside of Beijing. We were outside of Fifth Ring, that, there's 5 rings that go around the city, and we lived just outside of Fifth Ring. So we were literally right outside of city limits, because 4th ring is where it stops. 5th ring is considered rural. And then outside of 5th ring, we were almost out of even the Beijing county, if you will, or province, and in the next province, which is mostly inhabited by foreigners. Most foreigners lived further out than we did. That said, the areas that we were in and that we got, and we were all over Beijing with various groups that we worked with, like the house churches and the English classes and so forth. A lot of them, their confession of faith, I'll give you a parallel. It would be comparable to somebody having grown up in church and believing that they were a true believer in Messiah without ever having even acknowledged that they're a sinner or knowing that they are. It's very, very close to that. Well, sure, I'm a Christian. I attend such and such Baptist church. Well, sure, I'm a Christian. I attend such and such Episcopal, or what have you. And I don't recall a lot of conversion testimonies, contriteness, repentance, or a penitent heart, regret for past sin, or even knowing what sin is, especially by a biblical definition from 1 John 3:4. But more even along the lines of, to him that knows to do good and does it not, to him that's sin. I don't remember even hearing a lot of them confessing that. The ones that did were typically the ones that were drawn to want to be in our meetings. And I don't mean that to sound like we were the thing. I just mean that they were the ones that were hungry for genuine truth and searching for it. And they like a lot of Christians would hop from one meeting to another trying to find that. Those were definitely not the norm, though. Those were the minority plus. I mean, I hate to even guess at a percentage, but if I had to, I'd say less than 10% of who we met.
Mhm. Well, I mean, not to be too pessimistic, but I think that's a better ratio than we get in American Christian churches.
Yeah, that
You
may
know,
be very, yeah, I'd say that's probably accurate.
there are tares in every wheat field. And you know what you're saying about, people being attracted to Christianity just because it's the Western thing to do. It's cool. Um,
Mhm.
we get that in the pronomian movement too. People who are attracted simply because it's fringe. It's the next un unpopular thing to do that makes me a
Right.
little edgy or whatever. I'm
Yeah.
going to follow this new calendar because nobody's ever heard of it before.
Right.
um, yeah, so I've got one more question, and then I'm going to kind of open it up to everybody else. Um, as these house churches grow or spread out, as new ones crop up, I can't imagine that there's a lot of accountability between them. One teacher I saw being interviewed was pretty radical about some of his eschatology. I don't know. I'm pretty sure he was just winging it. I don't know what his actual biblical knowledge was. Um, without without some kind of hierarchy or official structure, how do you know which teachers are actually biblical and which are just making stuff up or creating their own little cults?
That's a great question. I think it's probably the same as we would say of house groups here in America. 119 Ministries has done a phenomenal job of giving people a platform to let others know we have a home group, or we have a small group, or we have a Messianic congregation, we have a Hebrew roots congregation, we have, what have you. We're meeting in such and such church on Saturday because they don't use it or whatever, you know. So we call ourselves a congregation and not a house group or house assembly, house church. We're in an actual congregational setting, what have you. They've done a phenomenal job at giving us the ability to make ourselves known and for people to be able to find like-minded individuals. On the flip side of that, there's no way they can possibly vet all of those. From the time they started that thing, when I first saw it, there was maybe 35 dots on the US. Now you can't put a cursor on the map hardly without it hitting a red dot. And it has exploded, which is both encouraging and horrifying in some ways. Encouraging because that tells me people are genuinely hungry for something. Where it's horrifying is not knowing what that something is that they're going to feast upon, and what goes in comes out. And it's the same in China. We saw, okay, I'll give you an example. There was a lady who was being tormented in her sleep, and spirits would literally wake her up, and she'd be bruised and beaten, and she slept alone. So it wasn't a husband doing it while she was asleep or slipping her medication and knocking her out, beating her up, nothing of that nature. There was no boyfriend. Well, we were asked to do a deliverance on her because it was obvious that this was demonic possession. But I'm a Christian. How can this be? Well, it turns out she had the mummified remains of her great, 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 great grandparents' hands in a shrine in her home, which is a part of their religion. The Chinese paganism, if you will, had this as a part to keep them close. It's disgusting to us, but it's like, if I ever want to hold my great, 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 great grandparents' hands, I can. Right. And I'm super simplifying it. That's way oversimplification. But that's kind of the idea. It keeps them close. They stay attached to us. Well, yeah, they do, but it's not really them. The them that's attaching is something that you don't know isn't them until it's way too late. And so we asked the people who were asking us to come, Is she willing? Well, she doesn't want to give up the shrine. Well, then why do you want us to come do a deliverance for someone who's going to fall right back into the same pattern? And Messiah himself said that, it will be 7 times worse. No, we're not going to do that. Well, but she needs deliverance. Yes, she does, but she doesn't need what's going to come as a result of it. And that's what you're asking us to participate in. You're asking us to come free her basically against her will, which isn't going to work anyway, because she still wants to hang on to what she has. Until she's willing to give that up, she isn't going to be free for long. And that's the kind of lack of accountability that we saw. These people had beautiful hearts, wonderful, wonderful personalities, very likable, very charismatic. And you know what? I believe they truly were followers of Messiah. Mostly antinomian, but still their heart was headed in the right direction, which gave us hope that we could get through to them. And yet they wanted us to come do something that was clearly against biblical principle, when the entirety of the principle is taken into consideration and not just the one segment. Come out. Well, yeah, come out, but then she has to come out from amongst them, or a worse thing will come upon her. And that's probably the best example I can give of the stereotypical lack of accountability that we saw. It was rooted in a lot of compassion, but not a lot of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like we have that exact same problem in the Torah movement in the United States, and that's why I asked that question, is because there are so many small house congregations popping up everywhere, and how do you don't know what you're getting when you show up to one of those places. It could be anything, but it seems to me that, at least for people who have virtually unlimited access to the scriptures, that's your answer. If you know the scriptures, then you should be able to tell if somebody is getting off base. And I realize that not everybody can be a Bible scholar, not everybody can spend all their time studying the scriptures. But if you're going to be a believer, a disciple of Yeshua, then you need to know them, better than you used to. And you need to know them better tomorrow than you did today. But that's about the best defense I can think of.
Well, yeah, the one goal that we made our goal, if you will, in these meetings is to convey a Hebraic context to whatever topic we were covering that day, because we pretty much had to make it topical. Trying to do anything expository, going verse by verse, would never have flown, because we just couldn't meet regularly enough in the same location, and we never had the same crowd 2 months in a row. Or if we did it twice in a month, it wasn't the same crowd from one biweekly meeting to the next. And we had to get very good at security. We had to get very good at passing code verbiage in the WeChat app that we utilized to reach out to all of the people who were interested in attending the meetings that we were doing. And I even did a PowerPoint that talked about being a good citizen with scriptural references in Chinese, and put it on autoplay behind me on a big screen while I was teaching, regardless of what topic I was teaching on. Because then if we had any government officials walk by and look in, they would see, hey, there's a guy talking about being a good citizen like Jesus. And regardless of what my topic was. And we made it very clear to them that we were not going to provide Chinese translation, but they could take a recording with them and have someone translate it to them later, as long as they didn't turn it on until after introductions were made, because we didn't want any names included. So we would tell them at the beginning, okay, please don't turn your recorders on yet. We would do our introductions of everybody that was going to be speaking that day. And they say, okay, now you can turn on your recorder. And we had to get very, very good at that kind of I don't want to call it subterfuge, but in a way it is. And I think that is probably the biggest lesson we came away from, is insert the Hebraic context, and then teach as simplistically as possible basic principles of hermeneutics, and let them begin putting those two things together and practice on their own. And if we did accomplish that with the people that we met with, I feel very fulfilled about it. But the problem is, after leaving there and having to give up our WeChat apps and get new phones because we found viruses embedded in our phones that were contained in the WeChat app, even after we deleted it, they were still there. We have lost contact with all those people, except for the ones that are on Facebook. So I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say that we better learn those lessons here quickly, because a lot of the apps, just like this one we're using now, are probably connected to an AI doing the same job as the AIs did in China to locate people. And I'll close with this before you open this up for others. We left 6 months, somewhere between 3 months and 6 months after we left. Some friends of ours finally tracked us down, some American friends that we made in China. They were also part of a YWAM group. That's kind of how we all got put together. It's a long story, but too long to give here. Anyway, they said, hey, we've been blackballed, and we were escorted to the airport, given an hour to pack, and we can't go back for 10 years. Probably don't want to ever go back now. But we needed to let you know that Tim was brought up in our interrogation. They were 300 kilometers from us when they were taken into custody. We hadn't seen them in months, but my name was brought up specifically. Is he an anti-communist Christian leader? And they questioned them about me for an hour separately inside their 4-hour interrogation each. And I take that pretty seriously. Not because if I ever go back to China, I'm going to be tracked down, chased down, whatever. I probably will be if I ever go back. If Abba opens that door and I feel like it's necessary to step through, we will. And I'm not even going to care about any of that. But we'd better learn hard lessons from that, not out of fear, but so that we can continue to do the work of God, carrying the true gospel of our Messiah, which, as John put it in Revelation 12:17, 14, 14:12, and 22:14, they need both the commandments and faith in Yeshua. And if we're going to do that, I think it's important for us to be prepared, because some of us may find ourselves sent into Central America, South America. Some of us may find ourselves behind what is currently supposedly not an iron curtain, but probably really is. And who knows? There may be a time in our lifetime that it's necessary to know for here. And again, I don't want to say that in fear. It's not about fear. He doesn't give us prophecy to scare, but prophecy to prepare.
Yeah, I think prudence is it's a vital aspect of wisdom. It's one of those concepts that keeps coming up in our Proverbs Bible study. In our local fellowship, we use a Signal app for day-to-day communications, and it's supposedly, encrypted end-to-end and secure. Is any app really secure when it's run on a Google or an Apple phone? I kind of doubt that's even really possible.
I agree.
All right, so I know we've got I think 7 people online here besides myself and Tim. So I'm sure that somebody's got some comments or questions. I'm sure that there's a lot of aspects of the idea of resilience and maintaining faith under persecution that I haven't even touched on. Actually, I know there are, because we just don't have enough time to get to them all. But I want to hear what is mostly on your mind. Daniel's got his hand up. So why don't you go ahead and go first, Daniel?
All right, thank you. I appreciate all this. I appreciate the speaker coming, Tim. I appreciate you speaking with us and everything. Thank you, Jay, too, for hosting this. But I just want to say that I do want to talk with Tim in private, maybe later, about some things. It's not so much as anything bad. It's just, see, I I grew up Pentecostal too, and then I came to Messianic Judaism in 2014, and I was introduced to Torah observance for the first time, and that was something that I was wanting to ask him on and questions about that, but that'll be personal. But um, I do want to say, and as far as the Trinity, I had questions about him for him on that, but I have so many questions. But how did you find, to be frank, Tim? How did you find the presence of Yeshua among the? I mean, how did you come across? How would I say? How did you find all that peace among all the trials and everything you went through in China? And how did you go about? Did the Ruach, I mean, the Holy Spirit, speak to you in that manner, or did it, or is there something a lot more to that?
Well, I think that's multifaceted. And before I forget, Daniel, if you want to contact me, my email address is info, short for information, at remnantnation.org, info at remnantnation.org. And anybody that wants to reach out, please feel free to. You can find us at remnantnation.org, common spelling, remnantnation.org. Now, having said what I did about it's multifaceted, there's a couple of dynamics at play here. First of all, the principalities that I believe oversee China are crafty, in that when you're there, you don't feel like you're in a communist nation. That the only very, very distinct thing that I get, sorry, my phone keeps buzzing and I'm trying to find a place to put it where you won't hear the sound. The best parallel I can give you, or the best word picture I can give you, is when we were there. If my wife's an intercessor, she prays and prays and prays. That's her heart. She's in prayer all the time. And if she woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and felt the need to walk around our apartment complex or outside the gates of our apartment complex and through our little neighborhood of Shunyi, I didn't worry about it. That's how secure it really was. Violent crime did happen, but it was so rare. And sadly, a part of that is probably because you just didn't hear about it, because the government owns the news outlets that would ordinarily have announced it. So unless it went viral in a video on WeChat before the government could yank every copy of it, which did happen, and it happened really fast. That AI was par none. But there were times, like there were stabbing attacks inside their main train hub, like we would consider Grand Central Station or something like that. In Beijing, they had a main central train hub for the above ground train, like the bullet train. And we were there more than once, passing through there. And on one occasion, a few days before we needed to be on that train around Chinese holidays, there was someone ran through and just randomly stabbing foreigners. And they took him down and arrested him, what have you. And the video made it viral, and we happened to catch it. It had been up for 5 minutes when someone forwarded a copy to us. We watched it, and when we tried to forward it at the end of this 90-second video, it was already pulled. So as far as peace was concerned, there's a very false sense of security that blankets Beijing for sure, and 2 or 3 of the other cities that we spent significant time in, down in southern China, in going into mainland Hong Kong and into China, Hong Kong Island, over on the coast near the ocean. those cities didn't feel communist, and they didn't feel oppressive until we were leaving. When we would hit airspace, didn't matter which way we went, north toward the Arctic, which we did about 50% of the time, or more direct toward the US across the ocean without going over Alaska and Russia and down into Chicago. When we were going into Dallas in the southern route, there was a certain place every flight, both of us would literally feel a lightness. And we hadn't realized how oppressive the spiritual atmosphere was, because it comes on so gradually. And frankly, I do believe there was a grace for us. Pardon me. I believe Ruach HaKodesh did indeed put a grace on us, that we were able to bear the weight of it, because frankly, my commute was 90 minutes each way every day, morning and afternoon. My commute to the university was so difficult sometimes that they just gave me an apartment, and I would live 3 days at the university and 4 days at home. And the intensity of it was something we didn't really feel as much while we were there, but only when we would leave, we'd feel the release. And without getting, too hyper spiritual or too, whatever, I did have a vision before we left. I was in prayer, and like Peter described, it was almost trance-like, not quite to the intensity that I think Peter describes it in Acts. But there was I saw 4 Buddhas, big golden statues floating over this park. I didn't recognize the park until we got there. And it was right in the middle of Longjing, right across the street from the Antinomian church that my buddy Joe operated. And I realized then that what Holy Spirit, what Ruach HaKodesh had shown me in that moment, is that these things reign supreme over this area, and they are principalities that are, because they were gold and shiny and beautiful and floating above everyone else, they felt untouchable. And they were also, all 3, way more obese than any Buddha statue you've ever seen. And when that dawned on me, and then the connection of how it felt when we would leave, the lifting, I realized that those spirits wanted to be sure that anyone who came with truth, anyone, and again, I'm trying to be careful to not say that I have all the truth and the Antinomians had no truth. That isn't my point. But anybody that came with truth didn't feel it necessary to do direct spiritual warfare and pray against those principalities. They were extremely deceptive. They were extremely careful to not trigger any believer who might carry an ability to pray in a way that would affect what they do and the people they control. Does that adequately answer your question, Daniel? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. It sounds just like the same spirit that's been over the United States. It feels like it.
Yeah, different culture, and of course they, because of the different culture, they operate within the confines of that culture and influence according to the direction that culture is already running itself. But yes, same strategy. It lulls people to sleep. Sure.
Okay, let's move on to another question here. Heidi's got her hand up. So why don't you go ahead, Heidi?
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for your time. I've actually been on your Facebook group for a little while and perused some of the resources on your website. And if you guys haven't had a chance to go, there's some really fantastic books and other resources for educating yourself. And anyway, I just really appreciate the time you guys put into that. I am myself a former Pentecostal recovering YWAMer. So a lot of what you're saying has been really interesting. Question, Did you happen to meet in YWAM a YWAMer named Harold Viana? Did you ever meet Harold? He's from Brazil.
You know, I don't believe I did, but for some reason the name does sound vaguely familiar. Do you know what part of China he was in?
I think he was a lot more rural. I just know that YWAM can be a smaller, it's a small world within the bigger world.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
He and I were on staff in Oregon together.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, see, my in-laws are the founders of YWAM Tribal Winds in Flagstaff and out on the Hopi Indian Reservation. And so when we were working with my buddy Joe, we got introduced to some YWAMers who were there on their one of their mission trips, and one of the, I forget what they call it during their DTS. Anyway, they were there for that, for the mission phase. And through those people and a handful of others, we got introduced to the leaders from the business YWAM base and the DTS, the regular DTS YWAM base in Beijing. But through them, we further got introduced to people who were kicked out of Beijing and fled to Tianjin. And in Tianjin, that group then became another YWAM group for us. And we did meet people periodically from other bases, but it was usually so fast, one meeting, one introduction, one cup of coffee, and then everybody went back into their hiding. Because YWAM is definitely has to tread more lightly than we did, because the very fact that they can be connected through YWAM activity, and all of the bases in Beijing were raided simultaneously while we were there.
Wow.
So I'm really, my wife is a YWAMer. She did her DTS in Australia and then did outreach. That's what it was, the outreach phase in Africa and Egypt. But so if we had somehow officially connected with YWAM while we were there, they probably would have raided our home at the same time they raided all of those bases. But we were very fortunate that Abba gave us the wisdom to not directly connect or officially connect with YWAM and do what we did through YWAM, because it was something we seriously considered.
So very cool. My parents actually taught from 99 to 2008 up in Zhengzhou through CIOS University. I don't know if you've heard of that program, but they taught English and went to the Three Self Church and had they had classes in their apartment where they would teach ancient literature, essentially Bible studies, baptisms in their bathtub and the whole thing. And several of their students actually came to visit after they came back to the States, and we were able to engage with some of them. But a lot of what you're saying is resonating with the stories that I heard from them and all of that. So, wow, that was really fantastic. I actually have some questions. When we're, going back to our topic and what we are, discussing about functioning as the body of Messiah in an oppressive environment. I know that you are on your website, if I remember this correctly, you are working to create a network of fellowships, whether loosely affiliated. I don't think you're trying to create your own denomination or anything, but just, how to network bodies together. What would you think for us in our local Central Texas area or Texas area? What do you think are some really good beginning steps to creating a local network? What are some advice could you give for what a local framework would be? Okay, how to do that? Well, I'm not asking for a definitive answer, just like direction, I guess.
Sure, I get it. Yeah, if you don't mind, I have a couple of questions that might help me put it into context for me so that I can give a more astute answer. Are we talking about starting a home group from the beginning with absolutely no other like believers?
No, my husband and I actually started a home fellowship about 3.5 years ago. And during the feasts, we've had as many as 75 to 80 people showing up to celebrate feast with us. When we do meet, it's between 30 to 45 people that do meet with us. And then we have a couple other sister communities. Jay and Paula have one in Brenham. So we're kind of spread out, and we're looking at, my husband and I have never had the desire to start a movement or, build a congregation and make it bigger and bigger and get the building and do the whole thing. Our desire has always been to have a home fellowship that naturally sort of cell division goes off and becomes another home fellowship. That's who we are.
Yeah, that's very much the model that I think we see in the apostolic writings, in the Greek scripture, the New Testament, whatever. And forgive me, I always say /this/this/this, partly because I don't want to offend anybody, but partly because I want to make sure that everybody that's listening hears a label or a term or a phrase that helps connect the dots for them when I don't use it later, but I use only one or two of the references. So what we see in the apostolic scripture or the apostolic writings is the pastor doesn't appear to be the sole deliverer of the message. In fact, we very rarely see that when we get to the Hebraic context of this whole Ephesians 4 corporate leadership type structure. And I say it in quotations because I don't believe in a corporate type structure. It's not a hierarchy, because Paul in that same chapter or in that same letter tells us that we should all submit to one another in love. So an apostle should be submitting to a layman should be submitting to a pastor. Whatever labels people wish to adopt based on the job description that someone feels called to. Okay, are they doing the work of an apostle? Maybe they're an apostle. Are they doing the work of a pastor? Maybe they're a pastor. Are they doing the work of an evangelist? Maybe they're an evangelist. I don't really care about labels. But they do help us narrow down job descriptions, even though there are some threads of work that each of them does in common, or maybe two or three of them does in common, but the other two or three don't, etc. And when we help establish a group, we always want to point out at the very onset, start watching for the people whose mentor abilities kind of start making itself very evident. Not that the person necessarily spiritually or intellectually stands head and shoulders above everybody else, but people are literally drawn to them for mentoring, and they're drawn to people for mentoring. I think that pastoral mentor gift, because it's not pastor teacher so much, and I said fivefold a minute ago, but not purposely. Honestly, in the nuts and bolts of it, it's probably a fourfold, and pastor as teacher or pastor teacher is one of the predominant ones we're seeing there. Apostles, again, this depends on one's personal biblical partitioning. Some believe that the apostle doesn't exist anymore, and they're completely welcome to believe that. But if we look at the work of an apostle is somebody who forges forward and helps to establish these new works. They help in establishing doctrine by removing false doctrine. And that's the example Messiah gave us as the apostle of our faith. He established us by removing the takanot and the heavy burden, as we see in Acts 15, from Torah obedience, and said, look, just live it like I live, as John recommended in 1 John 2:6, I believe. So just live like Messiah lived. Well, when you start seeing people who are doing that and others are drawn to them for mentoring, there's your pastors. Pastors are mentors. When we look at the model of the first century congregations, most of them were house churches or house groups, house congregations, house fellowships, whatever label works best. There were a few corporate meeting places. We know there was one at Antioch. We know that there was one in Jerusalem, and probably one at Ephesus. But for the most part, those were multiple house groups that came together on occasion. We don't know. We don't see anything that says they met on a weekly basis. But it does say they gathered regularly for fellowship, for meals, and they probably spoke over scripture, just like they were accustomed to doing at the synagogue every Shabbat. So those home groups, we see the elders and probably the prophets, like Agabus and so forth, leading those congregational discussions. But we know that the doctrine, the foundation of what we do, must meet with what's laid by the apostles and prophets. But the problem is the modern body of Messiah has been so Christianized or so Western indoctrinated that now we need apostles and prophets to help pull away the Takanot, the modern Takanot of modern Christianity, in order to help us to get back to what is Torah obedience and what is not. How do I live like Messiah did by being obedient to Torah, but not being obedient to the traditions of men, if for some reason I've been completely convinced my entire life that the traditions of men are what Jesus did, or what Messiah did? And so I think that those roles are still there. And I think that those roles are discovered by what are people gravitating toward? Where is their gifts, their talents, their intellect, their ability, their passion? What is it driving them toward in their role? And that will define what their role will be within a local home group, or a corporate meeting within a group of home groups. And when we're ready to, okay, we've now outgrown our this home group, we're at 50, and we really need to keep it closer to 25 or 30 to be manageable. Who are the mature believers we've watched rise up in those positions that we can say, hey, would you be interested in hosting? And let the people decide, hey, I'm closer to this new home group than I am the one that I'm going to, and not get this squabbling. When I announced on Facebook that God, and I used very Christian lingo back then because we were still doing this whole thing of trying to build the bridge and not worry so much about, hey, we're different, and just being different. We really wanted to bridge the gap. I announced on Facebook, I believe that God is about to launch us into what he brought us to China for. Less than 3 weeks later, I got a private text message from Joe, the pastor, telling me, or asking me, hey, please don't fleece my flock when you leave and plant a church. I'm like, what are you talking about? I have no intention of planting a church. I told you when I came here, I wasn't coming here to plant churches. And I honestly didn't even want to be leadership in a church. I came here because of the people. I'm here because God gave me a burden for China, for people. I'm not here as a leader. I'm not here as a director. I'm not here as a pastor, etc. And I think that that's where we can separate ourselves more distinctly from the corporate CEO pastor type church structure, is that, hey, it's okay if this 20 people, this, it's hard for me to do this on this camera. I should have used the widescreen. But anyway, if this piece of the pie, right, here's my pie, this piece of the pie now wants to go over here because it's closer to their home, or because they're just compatible with that individual, or maybe that individual was instrumental in establishing them in this group. So I'm going to be faithful and follow them because I have this relationship. They're already my mentor, pastor, my teacher, pastor/teacher. So, I typically recommend that when you know that it's time, prayerfully consider those people who have, by nature of their natural giftings and their giftings that Holy Spirit has highlighted to you, and they do stand above the rest, not in superiority, but because they stand out for that purpose. Those are the people to prayerfully consider going to and saying, hey, we feel like it's time for us to establish a second group. We're not, and you can decide whether or not you want to oversee it, you want to partner, you want them to be completely autonomous. Our structure inside the Remnant Nation Network is all of the groups that we get together and talk with can come under Remnant Nation as a mentoring situation, or they could be completely autonomous. We don't care. If they want that mentoring relationship, we work on it and we build it, and we try to set up more frequent meetings with them. Right now, we're trying to get back to doing our monthly meetings with everybody. That group has grown to about 45 now. I was telling Jay before we got started that I feel like I'm terribly behind with that. But aside from everything else we're doing, I really need to get back to doing at least a monthly or bi-monthly meeting with this group of 45 people who have elected to want to be a part of these meetings on how to grow their home group and how to govern it in a way that doesn't allow the crazy, flaky fringe stuff to become their mainstream theological platform, but at the same time, give them the freedom to search out scripture for themselves and determine what is Abba doing with our group. Because ultimately, I'm not in that group. I don't know what he wants for that group unless it's by some divine impartation, revelation, or whatever, or the leader comes to me and says, hey, I'd really like your help with this. And it's not my job to tell that group how to govern themselves and no, it's self-governing, right? Going back to the original point of the three self missiology, they should be self-supporting, they should be self-governing, and they should be self-perpetuating, so that every group becomes a sending group as people rise up and they are obviously being pointed at by Ruach HaKodesh, saying that person is someone I want to use, but I can't use them to their full potential inside this group. Release them and let them take some of the flock if they need to establish a group where they are. Does that adequately answer your question?
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. No, that was really great. I took notes. The other is more of a logistical question. I am fairly certain I can guess where you stand on the whole 501c3 nonprofit, register with the government to exist kind of a thing. But that is definitely something that, you know, when you look at expanding, or you look at, you know, what does this look like? We don't ever, in our group, we don't ever ask for a tithe, or it's usually if there's a need, we let people know, and then people contribute as the Spirit leads them. And there's been what we need, and so we haven't asked for more. What do you, like, moving forward, do you see this division in the body between those who are following that government route of the 501c3, having all of their finances, you know, filtered through the government, and then local networks and how that works? I mean, do you think that it'll probably need to either be, I don't know, a barter system? I mean, this is kind of further afield, but a barter system, or, you know, cash only, or just, I guess I feel a sense of urgency that, you know, obviously resources are necessary to make something function. People have to eat, electricity has to be on. You know, if you're having a larger gathering for the feast or whatever, it doesn't, my backyard doesn't work in Texas in September. So we found that out last year. So what would be your counsel? How do you navigate that? Or thoughts?
That's a great question. And it is one that we wrestled with for a long time. As I mentioned, you know, this actually began in 2004 when I was at World Harvest Bible College, after leaving World Harvest Bible College, but still being in that area about 3 years after. So I went there in 2001 to 2003. In 2004, this whole idea was birthed about training people to come together after that Ephesians 4:20 model, and what does that really look like, and planting. At that time, it would have been churches, because I was still in that process of leaving the church to follow this more first century biblical model, because I don't want to say that everything the church does is unbiblical. But this more first century biblical model, because I do believe that it was prophetic when Messiah said, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It's the first generation will be like the last, and the last generation will be like the first. I think there is a portion of us who will be and are being called back to that first century model. I don't know that it's for everyone, but I think that everyone that wants to be in it certainly is invited by Ruach HaKodesh. And I say that because Messiah is in an end times discourse when that topic comes up of the first and the last. And I think that the church has clearly missed it because of their Greco-Roman exegesis and how they partition things off looking at too much at the punctuation and the verse numbers and so forth, that this has become a separated topic. Up here, it's the end times, down here, it's something else. Now, steering that toward your question, we wrestled for months over whether or not to do a 501c3. And I finally came to the conclusion we needed to be incorporated because we can't have an accredited university without a corporation. We do not have to be a not-for-profit. We can collect and pay taxes like anyone else, and that's what we're doing. I took our Remnant Nation, turned it into an LLC. I registered Remnant Nation University as a fictitious name in the same state that our corporation is in, which is Florida. We did that because Florida gives religious universities the ability to self-govern without governmental interference, so long as they meet the educational and accrediting requirements necessary by the state. And every year we have to submit a report. That report is reviewed by a body. The body then decides if they're going to extend that continued grace, if you will, to us. Now, the reason we needed the fictitious name is so that people can register or can pay to Remnant Nation University, and it can go into the same fund as any monies that come in for Remnant Nation. Remnant Nation earns its income pretty simply. Anybody that wants to donate is donating out of the goodness of their heart because we're not a tax-deductible organization. Now, the reason we made that decision is because 3 times, maybe it was 4, during the Clinton and the Obama administrations, the tax code was being reviewed, and a consideration was not only made, but voiced to the general public that all 501c3s that take a political stand, and the implication was obviously against that current administration, will be subject to their 501c3 being revoked and their taxes come due retroactively to the beginning of their 501c3. Now, I know that for a fact that one of the ministries that I was involved in, and I went to their Bible college for a while, was a $50 million a year organization. They had been $50 million a year in collections for probably 25 years at that point in time. Had that 501c3 been revoked, imagine the back taxes they would fold. Their
I can't imagine.
$70 million facility and properties would have been sold, and they would no longer have been a congregation. My bigger concern is that will turn from politics to state religion. And I think we can all probably see the writing on the wall that that's coming. I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but I can see that it's entirely feasible. The foundation for that is laid. I don't want them being able to tell Remnant Nation University what they can and cannot teach in order to remain their, now maybe they'll remove the governance, the self-governance. Maybe they'll remove accreditation or recognize the recognition of our in-house accreditation. Maybe, and we are working on some regional accreditation that would also then give foreign students the ability to transfer our credits to a university in their own country. We are working on that. God willing, that'll be done by the end of this year, beginning of 2024. But maybe they'll tell us, hey, you can't have that accreditation anymore either because we're no longer recognizing that organization. Well, that's fine, because by that point, most believers who are attending Remnant Nation University and teaching based on the exegesis and the hermeneutic that we teach, for them to discover what Scripture says for themselves, because it's very much about self-discovery. We just give them guided steps on how to discover the Hebraic context within what they're studying at that time. When that happens, those people aren't going to care whether or not we're accredited any longer. Right now they may, because they may decide, hey, I loved what I got in my associates. I love what I'm getting in my bachelor's at RNU, but I really want something bigger and, you know, a bigger pond to swim in for a master's or a doctorate or what have you. And that's fine. That won't offend us a bit, but we want to make sure that they're, at least until this implosion occurs, they can do that. And where any other organization is concerned with 501c3, whether it's a home group, a network of home groups, etc., I would caution, take those same things into consideration, because it may or may not be a political thing that you may one day face. It may be a state church thing. And that is probably a far more realistic concern, where home groups would be, you know, regarding home groups, to make it simple, because they're not going to go after home groups for political purposes. We're too small a fish. But when it comes to collectively getting all the money that all the home groups on 119's Fellowship Finder map has retroactively, all of those 501c3s, if every one of those, or even 50% of those red dots are a 501c3, you can bet anything you want on that. They're coming after it. And that's a surefire bet. So when it collapses, my greater concern is that it's going to collapse on the side of a state church versus the previous threats. And I think that was the enemy playing his hand by intimidating. Look, if you don't line up with our political agenda, we're going to take your money and we're going to make all of your back due taxes all the way back, retroactive to the beginning of your 501c3. So you better not come against our political agenda. Well, I think that was the enemy playing his hand. I don't have what it takes to make it happen right now, but I'm going to threaten you with it, because someday I will be in a position to make that happen. And I'm not only coming after you for political reasons, I'm going to get you for the reasons of sharing the truth as well. I'm going to shut you down, effectively remove your ability to move forward by removing your finances. Now, there is and getting to your final point of the part of the question, I do believe that, like every other time when great persecution came upon the body, we know that the Inquisition was heavily attacking not just the Jewish community, but the believers who were anti-Rome and Messianics, especially for their anti-Roman sentiment. But yet Abba created parallel economies, if you will. And yeah, I think some of it probably was based on a heavily guarded, secret bartering network. I do think that's probably the case. Have we found a whole lot of evidence of it? No, but that's probably because it was heavily guarded and secret. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. I'm guesstimating, but I don't see Abba leaving us without recourse or without provision. You'll never see his children forsaken or his seed begging for bread. I think that promise is relative to the generation and to the circumstance. If we're only able to access one loaf of bread a week, then getting one loaf of bread a week, we're not going to be out begging for bread because we know we're getting our fair share. If we are able to barter bread for other baked goods, for livestock, for eggs. Right now, we're getting 5 dozen a week out of our hens, and nobody we know is getting anywhere close to that. I've only got 14 hens, and I'm getting 5 dozen or more eggs a week. We're already bartering eggs because I have them coming out my ears. But there are other things that I could use. I could use, starter potatoes. I could use heirloom garden seeds. And yeah, I'll barter those with anybody who's interested. Here's 5 dozen eggs for 100 heirloom corn seeds. And I do think that's probably going to be part of it. And I think that some of us are already just naturally doing it because in our preparation, maybe we've over prepared. We had no idea this breed of hen was going to lay an egg every day year round, every hen lay an egg every day, but they are. Does that help? Does that, I hope I answered all of that.
No, that was fantastic. It was very comprehensive, and I appreciate that, because these are the things that I'm thinking, because obviously we are experiencing the blessing of having other believers around us, but we also want to be mindful of where we are and how we're living so that it can be sustainable even as the world changes around us. I did want to say, in addition to what you were saying about, the 501c3 and don't be political, I remember I was in, Sunday church at the time with the Clinton and early in the Obama administration, and I saw the ripple effect where pastors began to just back away from anything, quote, remotely political, and how that began to just really dilute the message. And especially, as we've gotten into, more liberal topics and all of that kind of stuff, and social issues becoming, it's like less and less that you can talk about. And so I think we just need to be aware of where we live. That obviously, thank you for your encouragement that God does care for us. He will never provide for people from my garden, but my kitchen does awesome things if you bring me food. So, we all know we have a place. So anyway, thank you so much, Tim. I really do appreciate your time and your and sharing from your heart and your expertise. So I'll let the floor be for somebody.
All right, well, we are coming up on almost on 2 hours here, and people are starting to drop off. So I think we need to wrap it up. And I really do appreciate you giving us this time and talking about your experience, Tim. This has been a great conversation. Again, if you want to contact Tim afterwards, info@remnantnation.org, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's the website also, remnantnation.org. Reminder, we've got our Proverbs 18 study this Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time. And the recording for this will be up on YouTube and Rumble, sometime later tonight. Check the event listings for anything else that's coming up, and our video index for all of our previous recordings. And the theme for next month, honoring your parents. I don't know who I'm going to get to talk about that or what they're going to talk about exactly. But if you got suggestions, send me a message. We'll figure it out. Thank you again, Tim. Be blessed, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jay. God bless all of you. See you soon.